He found her trembling in the dark, scarfing down cold fries from the garbage because she hadn't been paid a dime in 4 weeks. Her name was Mila, 27 years old, and she was living in a rusted 2003 Toyota Corolla parked behind the dumpster because she had nowhere else to go. Her mother was dying of stage 3 cancer in a hospital bed she couldn't afford. Her 17-year-old sister was sleeping on a friend's couch because Mila couldn't keep a roof over their heads. She had $23,000 in medical debt and not a single cent to her name. She was starving, not because she couldn't work. She worked doubles every single day, but because she refused to sleep with the manager. He had held her wages hostage for 4 weeks, telling her she could earn it back on her knees. She told him no, so he let her starve. But what Mila didn't know was that the man standing in the shadows, watching her stuff cold French fries into her mouth with shaking hands, wasn't just another customer. He wasn't just an investor who showed up once a month to check the books. His name was Marcus Blackwell. He was 36 years old. He owned 47 businesses across the city, and every single one of them was a front for the most powerful mafia empire on the East Coast. He had killed men for less than what that manager had done. And right now, as he watched this broken woman eat from the trash like a stray dog, something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. He reached into his pocket, not for his phone, not for his wallet, but for the keys to every door in this building, because Marcus Blackwell was about to lock this place down. No one was leaving, not the staff, not the manager, not until Mila Hayes got every single dollar she was owed, and not until the man who starved her understood exactly what it meant to cross someone like him. If this satisfies your soul, smash that like button and share it with everyone who needs to hear it. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a second of what comes next. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I love seeing this family grow across the world. Now, let's get back into the story, because what satisfies is only getting started. 2 hours earlier, Marcus Blackwell stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass wall of his penthouse on the 42nd floor, looking down at the city spread beneath him like a vast chessboard glittering with light, the black 3-piece suit fitting tightly around his powerful frame and completely hiding the tattoos that ran from his wrist up to his shoulder, his steel gray eyes unblinking as he listened to the pleading voice of the man kneeling in the middle of the living room, a man named Jonathan Mercer, 43 years old, formerly the chief accountant in charge of the financial operations of 3 of Marcus's 47 businesses, formerly because 20 minutes earlier Victor had placed on the table a stack of documents proving that Jonathan had transferred more than $800,000 into his personal account over the past 18 months, Jonathan sobbing, tears and mucus running down his pale face as he spoke about a daughter who needed money for medical treatment, about a wife who was pregnant, about financial pressures he could no longer bear, while Marcus said nothing, simply standing there with his back to Jonathan, the city lights reflected in his emotionless eyes. Victor standing by the door with his arms folded, his face as blank as stone. 2 other bodyguards on either side of Jonathan, gripping his shoulders, even though he had no intention of running, because no one ever escaped Marcus Blackwell. No one. And finally, after nearly 5 minutes of suffocating silence, Marcus turned around, walked slowly toward Jonathan, each step sounding evenly on the polished oak floor. Stopped directly in front of the traitor, and looked down at him with an expression many had described as the gaze into the pit of hell. Jonathan trembling so hard his teeth chattered as he whispered, "Please, sir, I'll give it all back, I swear, please give me a chance." Marcus tilting his head slightly as if weighing the offer, and then speaking in a voice so calm and even it was more frightening than any shout. "How old is your daughter?" Jonathan blinking in confusion at the unexpected question before answering. 8 years old, his voice shaking. Marcus nodding slowly and repeating, 8 years old, then adding, "So she'll grow up without a father," not raising his voice, not changing his expression, merely stating a fact as if he were talking about the weather, the blood draining from Jonathan's face as he whispered, "No, no, please, sir, I'll do anything you want." Marcus already turning away and walking back toward the desk, picking up the half-finished glass of whiskey, taking a small sip, then nodding once to Victor without looking back, Victor understanding immediately and signaling to the 2 guards who hauled Jonathan to his feet, his screams and pleas echoing through the penthouse as he was dragged toward the back door. While Marcus didn't turn around, didn't frown, didn't sigh, he simply stood there drinking whiskey and watching the city as if nothing of consequence had happened. Because this was his world. This was how he had built his empire over the past 15 years. Through fear, through cruelty, through a principle of absolute intolerance toward anyone who dared to betray him. A single rule taught to him by the foster father who had picked him up off the streets when he was 14. Never let them see you coming. A rule Marcus lived by every day, every hour, every minute. And tonight he had a routine inspection scheduled at the 12th branch of the Silver Moon Diner, the quietest and most profitable laundering point in his entire network. So he set the whiskey glass down, smoothed the sleeve of his jacket, and walked toward the private elevator, not knowing that this night would be the night that changed everything. The black Bentley Continental GT glided smoothly through the empty city streets at 10:45 in the evening. Marcus was alone behind the wheel, as he preferred to be when traveling to places where no one knew he was the real owner. Victor had stayed behind to finish dealing with Jonathan Mercer, and Marcus didn't need an escort for this routine inspection. The 12th branch of the Silver Moon Diner sat on the eastern edge of the city, in a working-class neighborhood where night shift workers stopped in for coffee and a late meal before going home. It was a perfect location for a laundering point, busy enough to generate high revenue without raising suspicion and ordinary enough that no one paid attention. Marcus parked in the rear lot, away from the flashing neon sign that read Silver Moon Diner on the awning. He stepped out of the car and breathed in the cold night air, mixed with the smell of grease and coffee. Inside, the diner was nearly empty, with only a few regulars finishing their last cups before closing time. The staff moved slowly with the tiredness of people about to end a shift. No one noticed the tall man in a black suit entering through the back door and walking straight toward the manager's office. Marcus held keys to every door in the building, including the small room filled with files and papers that Derek Morrison, the branch manager, used every day. He opened the door, switched on the light, and sat down in the old swivel chair that creaked under his weight. There were piles of paperwork on the desk, supplier invoices, timesheets, and the handwritten ledger Derek used to track daily expenses. Marcus opened the laptop kept in the drawer and logged into the accounting system with an admin account no one else knew existed. He scrolled through the numbers. Revenue was steady and even slightly higher than the previous quarter. Raw material costs were reasonable. Operating expenses were within acceptable limits. But when he opened the payroll section, his gray eyes stopped. Something was wrong. He scrolled down and checked each line. The total staff was 12 people. The total monthly payroll was between $22,000 and $25,000. But when he compared it to the timesheets, the numbers didn't match. Some names showed full hours worked, but amounts paid below minimum wage. Some weeks were blank with no records at all. And most of all, one name appeared constantly on the timesheets, but had vanished entirely from the payroll for almost a full month. Mila Hayes. Marcus frowned as he remembered the girl, a young server with dark brown hair and eyes always lowered, who worked harder than anyone else, took the worst shifts and the most difficult tables, and never complained. He had thought she was a model employee. Now, looking at the numbers, he saw a completely different story. 4 weeks of work, not a single cent paid. Marcus closed the laptop. His jaw tightened so hard the sound of his teeth grinding could be heard in the silent room. Someone was stealing right under his nose. Not his money, but the workers' money. And Marcus Blackwell hated that even more than betrayal. Marcus left the manager's office and stepped into the main service area at 11:15. The diner was closed to customers, the last guests having left 15 minutes earlier, leaving behind cold coffee cups and plates with a few crumbs of bread still on the tables. The staff were cleaning at the slow pace of people exhausted after a long day. Marcus stood in the dark corner near the register, watching them work without anyone noticing his presence. He had learned how to become invisible when necessary, a survival skill in the world he lived in. A young woman wiped down the tables with mechanical movements, her eyes staring into empty space, as if her mind were very far away. A young man stacked chairs onto the tables, the sound of metal touching metal echoing steadily in the quiet room. The cook in the kitchen was scrubbing the stove, the sound of running water and scraping forming the familiar rhythm of end-of-day cleaning. One by one, they left. The girl who had been wiping tables was first, pulling on a worn denim jacket and disappearing through the back door without saying goodbye to anyone. The boy stacking chairs went next, earbuds deep in his ears, his head nodding to the music. The cook was last, switching off the kitchen lights and walking toward the front door, pausing for a second when he saw Marcus standing in the shadows. "Lock the door when you're done," Marcus said, his voice low and even. The cook nodded without asking anything further. He had worked here long enough to know not to ask questions of this man. The door closed. The lock turned. Silence followed. Marcus was alone in the empty diner. He walked a slow circuit of the front area, checking the windows, the register, the chairs neatly stacked on the tables. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it should be. He was about to leave, his hand already touching the keys in his pocket, when he heard the sound. A soft click, metal touching metal, coming from the direction of the kitchen. Marcus stopped. Everyone had left. He had watched each of them walk through the doors. The kitchen should have been empty. The sound came again, this time accompanied by the rustle of paper and another noise he couldn't immediately identify. Instinct honed over 15 years in the underworld woke at once. Marcus didn't draw his gun. He didn't call Victor. He didn't do anything that might make a sound. He simply began to move toward the kitchen, each step placed on the tiled floor so lightly it made no echo at all. His handmade leather shoes glided across the floor like a ghost. His breathing slowed, even and fully controlled. His gray eyes swept the darkness, adjusting to the dim light of the single security lamp, still burning over the prep area. He passed through the swinging door that separated the service area from the kitchen, his body pressed close to the wall, moving along the shadows like a predator approaching its prey. And then he saw her. She was sitting curled up in the darkest corner of the kitchen, right beside the dry goods shelf, her back against the cold brick wall. Her dark brown hair had come loose from a cheap plastic clip, messy strands falling over her thin, pale face. Her faded teal server uniform was wrinkled and speckled with grease, and the white apron had yellowed and was tied loosely around her waist. In her hands was a foam food container, and she was eating so fast she almost didn't have time to chew, her trembling fingers stuffing cold fries into her mouth as if she were afraid someone might take them away. Marcus stood in the shadows watching her for several long seconds. He saw the sharp line of her collarbones under her colorless skin. He saw the deep shadows beneath her eyes from lack of sleep. He saw the way she swallowed each bite without tasting it, simply trying to put something into a stomach aching with hunger. And he saw where the container had come from the trash bin beside her where the customers' leftovers were thrown away at the end of the day. Marcus stepped out of the shadows. The heel of his leather shoe touched the tile and made a sharp sound in the silence of the kitchen, a sound that rang out like a gunshot in the night. Mila jumped. The container slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud, the remaining fries scattering across the white tiles. She looked up, and her pale green eyes went wide with pure terror when she recognized the man standing in front of her. She knew him. All the staff knew him, the investor, the man who appeared once a month to check the books. The man even Derek Morrison bowed his head to when he spoke. Mila backed away until her spine hit the wall, and there was nowhere left to go. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out, her throat closing with fear. Marcus didn't move, didn't step any closer. He simply stood there, his arms hanging loosely at his sides, his cold gray eyes fixed on her without blinking. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and even, more frightening than any shout. "When were you planning to pay for those?" Mila blinked, his words taking a few seconds to sink into her mind. "Pay." He was asking about money. "I'll pay," she stammered, her voice shaking so badly it was almost unintelligible. "I swear I'll pay when I get my wages. I'll pay every cent. Please don't fire me. Please, sir." Tears began to spill from the corners of her eyes, running down her hollow cheeks. She wasn't crying because of the shame of being caught eating leftovers from the trash. She was crying because of the thought of losing this job, her only remaining job, her last chance to earn money for her mother's hospital bills. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her as if trying to solve a complicated puzzle. "When you get your wages," he repeated, slower this time, emphasizing each word. Mila froze. There was something in his voice that made her feel as if he already knew the answer before he asked. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. The industrial refrigerator hummed somewhere behind them. The security light flickered once and then steadied. Mila swallowed hard, feeling as if someone were squeezing her throat shut. She could lie. She could make up a story about a delayed transfer or a system error. But when she looked into those icy gray eyes, she knew lying to this man would be the greatest mistake of her life. "I haven't been paid yet," she whispered, her voice barely more than breath. "How long?" 4 weeks. The 2 words fell into the space between them like 2 heavy stones. Marcus didn't move, didn't change expression, but Mila could feel something shift in the air around him, something dark and dangerous slowly waking up. 4 weeks. Marcus let the 2 words settle in the air, weighing them as if he were weighing a death sentence. He'd seen the numbers in the system. He'd known the answer before he asked, but hearing it from her own mouth made something in his chest tighten, a feeling he'd thought he'd buried long ago. "And you still came to work every day," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Mila nodded, tears still falling, no longer bothering to wipe them away. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. "I need this job. I need the money. My mother is in the hospital and the bills keep piling up every day. I can't stop working. I can't do anything else." Her voice broke on the last words and she began to cry in earnest, no longer able to hold it back. Her thin shoulders shook in waves, and she slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold kitchen floor, her arms wrapped around her knees like a child trying to make herself as small as possible. Marcus didn't comfort her. He didn't offer empty words about everything being all right. He simply stood there and waited in silence, because he knew she wasn't finished, and he was right. After a while, when the sobbing faded into small, broken hiccups, Mila looked up at him. Her eyes were red and swollen, but there was something else in them besides fear. There was anger, there was despair, and there was the exhaustion of someone who'd been fighting too long and no longer had the strength to fight. "Who told you wouldn't be paid?" Marcus asked, his voice still low and even but with a new sharp edge to it, like a blade being slowly honed. Mila hesitated. She looked down at the floor, then toward the door leading back to the service area, as if afraid someone might hear. "Mr. Morrison," she finally said, her voice so quiet Marcus had to lean forward to hear it. "Derek Morrison, the manager." Marcus didn't react. He didn't nod. He didn't change expression. He only continued, one question at a time, his voice growing colder with every second. "What did he say to you?" Mila swallowed. "He said the payroll system was broken, and that my wages would be paid as soon as the problem was fixed. And you believed him." She shook her head slowly. "The first week I believed him. The second week I started to doubt. The third week I asked again and She stopped, her breathing heavy. "He said that if I kept asking, I'd be fired, and he'd make sure no one else in this city would ever hire me." Marcus stepped closer, just one step, but Mila could feel the weight of it, as if the air around him were thickening. Anything else? It wasn't a question. It was an order. Mila knew she couldn't hide anything, not from those gray eyes cutting through her like lasers. "He said I could get my wages back," she said, her voice trembling. "If I agreed to do certain things for him." "What things?" Silence. The refrigerator hummed. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly. Mila's heart pounded so hard she could hear the blood in her ears. "He wanted me to sleep with him." 7 words. 7 words that fell into the space between them and exploded like a grenade. Marcus stood still, completely still, like a statue carved from cold marble. But his eyes, God, his eyes changed. They were no longer cold. They were burning. A dark and dangerous fire rose from deep within, the fire of restrained rage and violence waiting to be unleashed. When he spoke, his voice was only a whisper, but it was more frightening than any roar Mila had ever heard. "Did he touch you yet?" Mila shook her head violently. No, I didn't let him. I refused. That's why he didn't pay me. That's the punishment for saying no. He said I'd starve until I changed my mind." Tears spilled again, but this time they were tears of relief for finally having spoken the secret she'd carried through 4 weeks of hell. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief moment, and in that moment he wasn't a 36-year-old mafia boss standing in the kitchen of a small diner. He was a 14-year-old boy standing beside a hospital bed, watching his mother close her eyes for the last time after years of being exploited and treated like garbage. When he opened his eyes again, the decision had been made. Derek Morrison would pay. Not tomorrow, not next week, tonight. Marcus pulled a plastic chair from the corner of the kitchen and set it down in front of Mila. He didn't sit. He stood there with his arms crossed, looking down at her with an expression that had cooled into something even more frightening than rage, the cold calculation of a predator making a plan. "Tell me everything," he said, "from beginning to end. Don't leave out anything." Mila looked at him, hesitating. She didn't understand why this man cared. She didn't understand why a wealthy investor would want to hear the miserable story of a waitress whose wages had been stolen. But there was something in his voice, something behind the ice, that made her believe he truly wanted to know. And she'd been carrying this secret for too long. "It started last month," she said, her voice hoarse from crying too much. "Mr. Morrison called me into the storage room to check inventory. I didn't suspect anything because it was normal work. But when I went inside, he closed the door and stood in front of the exit." She paused and took a deep breath, trying to steady her trembling voice. "He said I was the hardest working employee here, that he'd noticed me for a long time, that he could help me make more money if I was willing to cooperate. I asked how to cooperate, and her voice caught. He put his hand on my shoulder and slid it down my back. I pushed him away and ran out of the storage room." Marcus said nothing, only nodded very slightly for her to continue. "That evening I got a message from his number. He said I'd humiliated him and I'd pay for it. The next week my wages weren't deposited. When I asked, he said the system was broken and told me to be patient. The second week was the same. By the third week I went to his office and demanded an explanation." Mila stopped, her eyes staring into nothing as if reliving the moment. He laughed. He laughed in my face. Then he said my wages would be paid immediately if I was willing to kneel under his desk. He said I could earn back every cent that way. Mila's voice hardened, anger mixing with the pain. When I refused, he said I'd never get a cent again until I changed my mind. He said he had connections in the local police, and if I told anyone he'd make sure my life became hell. He'd put in my file that I'd stolen from the register, and no one in this city would ever hire me. "Are you the only one?" Marcus asked, his voice cold as ice. Mila shook her head, tears spilling again. "No, there were others before me. I don't know how many, but I heard rumors. 2 girls quit suddenly last year and no one knew why. There was a girl named Hannah. She worked here about 6 months and then disappeared one day. Later I heard she tried to kill herself." Marcus drew in a slow breath through his nose. His jaw tightened until the muscle stood out under his skin. "Who else is working here now?" Mila hesitated, then whispered, "Sophie." "Who is she?" "A server. Works afternoon and evening shifts. She's been here 2 years. And has he done the same to her?" Mila was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "At first I didn't understand why Sophie was always paid on time while I wasn't. I thought maybe it was because she'd been here longer, or because she was favored. But then I noticed the way Mr. Morrison looked at her. The way he touched her shoulder when he passed by. The way she lowered her head whenever he called her into his office." She stopped, her voice breaking. "Sophie doesn't look anyone in the eyes anymore. She used to be cheerful and talkative, but now she's like a shadow. She works, gets paid, then goes home. She doesn't talk to anyone. She doesn't smile. She doesn't cry. It's like she's already dead inside." Marcus stood motionless, but the air around him seemed to vibrate with something dark and dangerous. In his mind he saw his mother, the woman who'd been exploited and humiliated until she no longer had the strength to live, the woman who died alone and in despair because no one had stood up to protect her. He'd sworn at her grave that he'd never let that happen to anyone under his authority, and Derek Morrison had broken that vow right under his nose for years. How many more? Marcus thought, his jaw clenched. How many lives had that bastard destroyed while he was busy with deals and numbers? "Rosa," he said suddenly. "The cook. Does she know anything?" Mila nodded. "Rosa knows everything. She's been here since the diner first opened, but she doesn't dare speak, because her daughter Lisa was also one of Mr. Morrison's victims 3 years ago. He threatened to do something to Lisa if Rosa ever opened her mouth." Marcus closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, the decision wasn't just confirmed. It had expanded. Derek Morrison wouldn't just pay. He would disappear. Forever. Marcus took his phone from the inside pocket of his jacket and dialed the only number in his contacts. Victor answered after the first ring, as if he were always ready for orders no matter the hour. "Come to the 12th branch of Silver Moon right now," Marcus said, his voice not wavering in the slightest. "Bring the full personnel files for this diner, and any information you have on Derek Morrison." Victor didn't ask why, didn't ask what had happened. He only said yes, boss, and hung up. That was why Victor was Marcus's most trusted lieutenant. He knew when to ask and when to act. Marcus turned back to Mila, who was still sitting curled on the kitchen floor, her swollen eyes looking at him in confusion and fear. "Stand up," he said. Not as a harsh command, but as a firm instruction that didn't allow refusal. Mila pushed herself up against the wall, her legs shaking so badly she almost fell. Marcus didn't help her, but he didn't take his eyes off her until she was steady. "Go sit at the bar out front and wait," he continued. "Don't go anywhere. I have something to take care of, and you'll need to be here when it happens." Mila wanted to ask what, wanted to ask why, wanted to ask what was going on, but she didn't dare open her mouth. There was something in this man's eyes that told her something terrible was going to happen tonight, and she wasn't sure she wanted to know the details. She nodded and walked out of the kitchen on unsteady legs. Marcus waited until the sound of her footsteps faded before he moved. He went back to the manager's office and opened the laptop again. While waiting for Victor, he dug deeper into the system, searching for things he'd overlooked earlier because he'd thought they weren't important. He opened Derek Morrison's personal file in the Human Resources system. 45 years old. Manager of the 12th Silver Moon branch for 5 years. Base salary $65,000 a year plus revenue-based bonuses. No formal complaints throughout his employment. But Marcus knew no complaints didn't mean no problems. It only meant no one had dared to speak. He opened the staff tracking sheet and started counting. Over the past 5 years, 17 female employees had left this branch. 17. An unusually high number compared to the other branches in the chain, and most of them had left abruptly, without notice, without official reasons. They'd simply vanished. Marcus ground his teeth. He'd been too busy with bigger deals, more complex schemes, more dangerous enemies, to notice the worm eating away inside his own organization. That was his mistake, and he'd fix it tonight. 20 minutes later, the back door opened, and Victor stepped inside. He was almost as tall as Marcus, broad-shouldered, face hard as stone, carrying a thick folder. Victor set it on the desk and looked at Marcus with a questioning expression but didn't ask. "Is there a problem, boss?" Marcus pushed the laptop toward him. "Read it." Victor scanned the screen, read what Marcus had found, and his face slowly hardened. After a minute of silence, he looked up, his eyes dark. "He's a filthy rat." "Call him in," Marcus said. "Right now. Tell him there's an urgent problem with the security system and that he needs to come in to sign some paperwork with the police." Victor nodded, took out his phone, and dialed. Marcus stood and went to the small window overlooking the rear parking lot. He could see Mila sitting at the bar in the service area, her shoulders hunched, her head bowed. She looked like a bird with a broken wing. But tonight, he'd give her new wings, and he'd break the man who'd tried to crush her. Marcus left the office and stepped into the service area where Mila was sitting. She was perched on a high stool beside the bar, her back curved, her hands clasped together on her lap, her eyes fixed on the marble countertop as if she were trying to find answers to questions she didn't dare ask. She didn't look up when she heard his footsteps, too used to making herself invisible to protect herself. Marcus walked behind the counter and switched on the coffee machine. The hum of the machine filled the quiet space, mixed with the sound of running water and the rich smell of roasted coffee beginning to spread. He took 2 white ceramic cups from the shelf, poured coffee into both, and slid one toward Mila. "Drink," he said, his voice no longer sharp, just a quiet instruction. "You need something warm inside you." Mila looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. She stared at the cup as if it were an alien object, unable to understand why this powerful man was serving her instead of the other way around. But she didn't dare refuse. She wrapped both hands around the cup, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers, and she closed her eyes for a brief moment, savoring the first warmth she'd felt in days. Marcus stood across from her, leaning back against the shelf behind him, holding his own cup but not drinking. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time under the full light of the service area. What he saw made his jaw tighten. She was frighteningly thin, her cheekbones jutted sharply beneath stretched pale skin. Her collarbones stood out like 2 bridges across her chest. Her wrists were so slender he could see the blue veins beneath her skin. Her eyes, though swollen from crying, still held a sad beauty, but they were sunken in their sockets and ringed with dark circles, as if she hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her hair was brittle and dull, a sign of prolonged malnutrition. And on her arm he noticed a bruise that had turned yellow-green, the mark of a hand that had grabbed her too hard. "Where do you live?" Marcus asked suddenly. Mila nearly spilled the coffee. She looked at him in alarm, as if the question were a trap. She stammered, then stopped. She knew lying to this man was pointless. He saw through her as if she were made of glass. "I sleep in my car," she finally whispered, lowering her head as if ashamed. "My 2003 Toyota Corolla. I park it behind the diner's dumpster after everyone leaves." "How long?" 3 weeks, since I couldn't afford the rent anymore." Marcus said nothing. He just stood there with his coffee, his face expressionless. But inside, a storm was raging. "You said you have a mother and a sister," he said. "Where are they?" Tears welled again in Mila's eyes, but she didn't sob. She just let them run down her cheeks in silence. "My mother is in St. Mary's Hospital," she said thickly. "Stage 3 cancer. She needs chemotherapy every week, and I don't have the money to pay. The bills are already up to $23,000, and they said if I don't pay at least part of it this month, they'll stop the treatment. And your sister, Jenny, she's 17. She's staying at a friend's place because I don't have a home for her anymore. She doesn't know I'm living in my car. She thinks I'm fine, that I'm just busy with work so I don't come home often. I don't want her to worry. She needs to focus on school." She paused and drew a shaky breath. "I'm the only one she has. Our father left when I was 12 and never came back. Our mother worked herself to exhaustion to raise us, and now she's slowly dying and I can't do anything. I work every day. I work double shifts. I don't miss a single day, and I still don't have a cent, because that bastard decided my body was the price for getting paid my own wages." Marcus set his coffee cup down on the counter with a soft click. He didn't speak. He couldn't, because if he opened his mouth now, he wouldn't be able to control what came out. Instead, he just stood there, his jaw clenched tight with pain, his gray eyes darkening to the color of a storm. And in that heavy silence, Mila saw for the first time something in his eyes that wasn't ice. It was fire, the fire of rage waiting to be unleashed. The sound of an engine from the rear parking lot broke the heavy atmosphere between Marcus and Mila. They both heard the car door slam, heavy, angry footsteps crunching on the gravel, and the rattle of keys as someone tried to open the diner's back door. "He's here," Victor said from the office doorway, his voice flat as a lake before a storm. Marcus nodded slightly and turned to Mila. "You stay here," he said, his tone allowing no argument. "Don't say anything until I tell you to. Do you understand?" Mila nodded, her whole body trembling as she realized who was coming. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear into the shadows the way she'd done for 4 weeks. But something in Marcus's eyes kept her in place, an unspoken promise that tonight would be different. The back door flew open and Derek Morrison stepped in, his face flushed with anger and maybe with drink. He wore a wrinkled shirt open at the collar, creased khaki pants, thinning hair slick with sweat even though the night was cool. His belly jiggled as he strode through the kitchen, his mouth already open to shout obscenities. "What the hell is this?" he yelled, his shrill voice echoing in the empty space. "Dragging me here in the middle of the night because of some damn security system. I was watching a movie with..." He stopped short when he reached the service area and saw Marcus standing behind the bar. The color drained from his face in seconds, from angry red to pale white to a dull gray. "Mr. Blackwell," he said, his voice suddenly sickeningly sweet. "I didn't know you were here. Is there something serious going on?" "I came as soon as I got the call. Is the security system all right? Is there anything I can help with?" Marcus didn't answer. He just stood there with his arms crossed, his icy gray eyes fixed on Derek without blinking. The silence stretched until Derek began to sweat. He licked his lips, his eyes darting around the room like a rat searching for an escape. And then he saw her, Mila sitting at the bar just a few steps from Marcus, her swollen eyes looking straight at him with fear and something else, something like hope. Derek's face changed again, this time to panic, quickly masked by a forced smile. "Mila," he said, trying to sound casual but with a slight tremor at the end. "What are you doing here this late? Your shift ended a long time ago." "Ms. Hayes is explaining some issues with payroll to me," Marcus finally said, his voice low and even in a way that was dangerous. "It seems she hasn't been paid in 4 weeks. Derek blinked. He looked at Marcus, then at Mila, then back at Marcus. His mind was racing for an explanation, an escape, a way to twist the situation around. "Oh, about that," he said, scratching his head with fake embarrassment. "There have been some technical problems with the payroll system this month. I reported it to Central Accounting, but they haven't fixed it yet. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. It'll be resolved soon." Marcus didn't react. He only asked calmly, "Then why have the other employees still been paid on time?" Derek stammered. Not everyone was affected. Only certain accounts. Maybe it's her bank, or maybe she filled out the original forms incorrectly." He turned to Mila with a cold look disguised as concern. "Actually, Mr. Blackwell, this Mila girl has some performance issues I was planning to report. She's often late. Her attitude with customers isn't good, and I have reason to believe she's been stealing food from storage. I'm considering terminating her, and that's probably why she's making things up to attack me." Mila opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus raised a finger and she fell silent. "So she's lying," Marcus said slowly. "Of course," Derek replied immediately, confidence returning as he thought he was being believed. "She's been a problem employee from the start. I've tried to be patient, but there's a limit. And her being here in the middle of the night means she was snooping around. You see, I told you, she steals." Marcus nodded slowly as if considering Derek's words. Then he looked at Victor, who was standing motionless in the corner, no one knowing when he'd appeared, holding a phone and a stack of papers. "Victor," Marcus said, his voice still terrifyingly calm, "show Mr. Morrison what we have." Derek turned toward Victor, his confident smile fading when he saw the other man's eyes. They weren't the eyes of an ordinary employee. They were the eyes of a wolf looking at prey. And for the first time that night, Derek Morrison began to understand he wasn't dealing with an ordinary investor. Victor stepped forward, each footfall sounding evenly on the tiled floor like the countdown of a bomb. He stopped less than a meter from Derek, close enough for Derek to smell the tobacco and leather on his jacket. "First," Victor said, his voice cold as steel, "the messages." He raised the phone and began to read aloud. "If you don't change your mind, you'll never get another cent. Who do you think you are to dare refuse me? I'll ruin your life, you stupid girl." Derek went pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Victor went on without pause. "This message was sent from your number to an employee named Hannah 18 months ago. She quit shortly afterward and tried to kill herself 2 weeks later." He swiped the screen. "And here is a message sent to Lisa, Rosa's daughter, 3 years ago. I know where you live. I know your mother works here. If you tell anyone, I'll make sure neither you nor your mother ever find work again." Derek took a step back, sweat starting to pour down his forehead. "How?" he stammered. "How do you have those messages?" Victor didn't answer. Instead, he took a tablet from his jacket and turned it on. "You thought you deleted all the security footage, didn't you?" Victor said, a cold smile flickering across his lips. "You forgot our system backs up to the cloud every night." He pressed play and turned the screen toward Derek. On it was black and white footage of the storage room, dated about a month ago by the timestamp in the corner. Derek Morrison stood blocking the door, one hand on the shoulder of a young, dark-haired waitress in uniform, Mila. In the video, Derek said something and his hand slid from her shoulder down her back. Mila shoved him away and ran out of the room, her face full of terror. Derek in the video watched her go with anger and contempt. Victor stopped the video. "There's more," he said. "A lot more. From many years back. You really thought no one saw." Derek turned to Marcus with pleading eyes. "Mr. Blackwell," he said, his voice shaking now. "This is a misunderstanding. I can explain. Those videos are edited. Those messages are fake. He pointed at Mila. "She seduced me first. I'm the victim here." Marcus still didn't speak. He just looked at Derek with those icy gray eyes, and that silence was more frightening than any accusation. The back door opened again, and an older woman stepped in. Rosa, the diner's head cook, her gray hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. She walked straight to Victor's side without looking at Derek once. "Mrs. Rosa," Marcus said, his voice softening slightly with the older woman, "please tell Mr. Morrison what you told me." Rosa drew a deep breath, her shoulders trembling. "I know everything," she said, her voice thick but steady. "I know what he did to my daughter. I know what he did to Hannah, to Sarah, to the other girls. I stayed silent because he threatened to harm Lisa. But I can't be silent anymore. Not after seeing little Mila starving right in front of me." She turned to Derek for the first time, and there was pure hatred in her eyes. "You're a devil," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You destroyed my daughter's life. Lisa isn't herself anymore after what you did. She can't trust anyone. She can't love anyone. You took her soul." Derek collapsed. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the diner, clutching his head with both hands, sobbing like a child caught stealing candy. "I'm sorry," he wailed, tears and snot running down his bloated face. "Please forgive me. I didn't mean any harm. It was the stress at work. My wife left me. I was lonely. I couldn't control myself. I need help. Please understand." Marcus finally moved. He stepped out from behind the bar and walked slowly toward Derek, each step sounding like a war drum. He stopped directly in front of the kneeling man and looked down at him with eyes that held not a trace of mercy. "Your wife left," Marcus said, his voice cold as winter. "You're lonely. You're stressed. And your solution was to destroy the lives of women who couldn't defend themselves." Derek looked up at him, his eyes full of desperate hope for forgiveness. But what he saw in those gray eyes told him there'd be no forgiveness waiting for him tonight. Marcus stood before Derek like a god passing judgment on a mortal. The air in the diner was so thick it felt as if it could be cut with a knife. Rosa stood motionless, her eyes still red but with a glint of grim satisfaction as she watched the man who'd destroyed her daughter now kneeling and trembling. Mila sat at the bar, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles were white, her heart pounding in her chest as she waited for what would happen next. Victor stood blocking the doorway, his arms crossed, his face as expressionless as a steel wall. Marcus bent down slowly, reached out, and grabbed Derek by the collar, hauling him to his feet with a single, effortless pull. Derek staggered upright, his legs shaking so badly he nearly fell, his eyes wide with terror as he realized his face was now only inches from Marcus's. "This is what's going to happen," Marcus said, his voice so low and even it was terrifying. No louder than a whisper, yet echoing through the silent room like thunder. "You're going to listen very carefully because I'll only say this once." Derek nodded frantically, tears and sweat streaming down his face. Yes, I'm listening. I'll do whatever you want." "First," Marcus said, "you'll pay Mila Hayes every cent of the wages you owe her immediately. 4 weeks of pay, calculated at the federal minimum wage, plus the average tips she should have received. You'll transfer it from your personal account because I know you have the money." "I checked." Derek nodded repeatedly. Yes. I'll transfer it right now. Right now. I have my phone." "Second," Marcus continued as if Derek hadn't spoken, "you'll compensate her $15,000 for what you've done. That's for the nights she slept in her car, For the meals she pulled from the trash. For the fear and humiliation you put her through. Derek's eyes widened. 15,000, he stammered. That's all my savings. Marcus tightened his grip on Derek's collar and pulled him even closer. Do you want me to raise that number? Derek shook his head violently. No. 15,000 is fine. I'll transfer it. I promise. Third, Marcus said, his voice dropping another few degrees. You'll leave this city within 48 hours. You'll pack up, sell your house if you have to, and disappear. I don't care where you go. Phoenix, Seattle, Alaska, hell, I don't care. But you won't be here when the sun rises the day after tomorrow. Derek opened his mouth to protest, but Marcus wasn't finished. Fourth, and this is the most important thing, so carve it into your brain. You'll never return within a 500-mile radius of this city. Not to visit friends, not for weddings, not for funerals. You'll treat this place as if it doesn't exist. Because if I hear your name, if I see your face, if I know you're anywhere near here. Marcus paused, his gray eyes locking onto Derek's with the gaze of death. What happens next won't be a conversation. Do you understand me? Derek understood. He understood more clearly than he'd ever understood anything in his life. The man in front of him wasn't an ordinary investor. He was something out of street stories, out of rumors about the dark, out of mysterious deaths the police never solved. Derek nodded, his mouth too dry to form words. And if you think about revenge, Marcus went on, his voice now light as a feather and sharp as a razor, if you think about coming back to harm anyone in this room, Mila, Rosa, anyone who's worked here, I'll know. I have eyes everywhere. I have ears everywhere. And when I find you, you'll wish you'd died tonight. He released Derek's collar and Derek stumbled back, nearly falling. Marcus straightened, smoothed the sleeve of his jacket as if he'd just handled a minor inconvenience. Now, he said, his voice back to normal, cold and controlled. You'll take out your phone and transfer the money to Mila Hayes right in front of me. Victor will read the account number. You'll transfer a total of $17,200, including the back pay and the compensation. If it's short a cent, if the transfer fails, if you try anything at all. Marcus stepped one pace closer and lowered his voice to a whisper meant only for Derek. Victor will take you out to the trash lot behind the diner and you'll never be found again. Derek took out his phone with hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it twice. He opened his banking app, entered the account number Victor read aloud, and transferred the money. $17,200, all his savings. His entire financial security built over years by exploiting vulnerable women. Transfer successful. Victor checked Mila's phone and nodded to Marcus. The money's in her account. Marcus looked at Derek one last time. 48 hours, he said. Victor will watch you until you leave the city. And Derek. He paused, his gray eyes cold as ice. If I ever hear another woman accuse you anywhere in this country, I'll find you. And next time there won't be a conversation. Victor stepped forward, grabbed Derek by the arm, and dragged him toward the back door. Derek didn't resist. He didn't beg anymore. He walked like a living corpse, his soul crushed by the man he'd thought was just a harmless investor. The door closed behind them, and the diner fell into silence. Silence settled over the diner after the door closed behind Derek and Victor. Rosa stood motionless for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the door as if she couldn't believe what had just happened was real. Then she turned to Marcus and tears began to roll down her wrinkled cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for my daughter, for all those girls." Marcus nodded slightly. "Go home, Rosa. It's been a long night. You need rest." Rosa nodded, wiped her tears with the corner of her apron, and walked toward the back door, then paused at the threshold and looked back at Mila, still sitting frozen at the bar. "She's very strong," Rosa said to Marcus. "She deserves better." Then she disappeared into the night, leaving only Marcus and Mila in the empty diner. Marcus took out his phone and dialed a number. "Hector," he said when the other man answered. "I need you to come to the diner right now. Bring what you need to cook a proper meal." He paused and looked at Mila with an expression she couldn't read. A meal for someone who's very hungry. Hector didn't ask why, didn't ask what was happening. He just said yes, boss, and hung up. Marcus put the phone away and walked back to the bar. He sat on the stool across from Mila, leaving a safe space between them. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice still low but softer than before. Mila looked at him, her eyes still red and swollen, but the fear was gone, replaced by confusion, disbelief, and a fragile thread of hope she'd thought had died long ago. "Why?" she asked hoarsely. "Why did you do all this for me?" "I'm just a waitress." Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked at her for a long time, his gray eyes deep as if they were turned inward toward something distant, a memory, a pain, a promise kept long ago. Because this is my diner, he finally said. And no one gets to treat my employees like that. 20 minutes later, Hector arrived with bags of fresh ingredients. He didn't ask what had happened, didn't look at Mila's swollen eyes or Marcus's dark expression. He just went straight into the kitchen and started cooking. The sounds of sizzling rose from the back, the smell of garlic and onions in oil spreading through the space. Mila breathed in deeply, her stomach tightening with hunger at the scent of real food, not cold leftovers from a trash bin. And she couldn't remember the last time she'd smelled hot food being cooked. Hector brought out a large plate and set it in front of her. Roasted chicken with mashed potatoes and sautéed vegetables. Steam rising, the scent of herbs and butter and garlic blending into something that made tears well in Mila's eyes. She stared at the plate, then at Marcus, then back at the plate, as if she couldn't believe it was real. "Eat," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "You need food." Mila took the fork with trembling hands, cut a small piece of chicken, and put it in her mouth. The meat melted on her tongue, the taste of butter, garlic, and herbs blooming in her mouth, and she began to cry. Not from sadness, not from fear, but because it was the first hot meal she'd had in weeks. Because she wasn't eating in the dark, afraid of being seen. Because for the first time in a long time, she was being treated like a human being. She ate slowly, chewing each bite, tasting each flavor, letting the tears fall onto the plate without wiping them away. Marcus sat across from her with a cup of black coffee in his hand, not speaking. He just sat there, drinking his coffee and watching her eat, not urging, not judging, not questioning, simply being there, a quiet, steady presence like a rock in a storm. Mila finished the entire plate, even using a piece of bread to wipe up the last of the sauce. And when she set the fork down, she felt full for the first time in 4 weeks. Not the thin fullness of cold fries, but a real warmth spreading from her stomach through her whole body. "Thank you," she said softly. Marcus only nodded, his eyes still on her. And in those cold gray eyes, Mila saw for the first time something like understanding. Hector cleared the plate away and disappeared into the kitchen to wash up, leaving Marcus and Mila alone again in the quiet of the service area. The fluorescent light hummed softly overhead. The wall clock pointed to almost 1 a.m, and beyond the glass, the city was asleep. Mila sat in silence, with both hands wrapped around the mug of hot tea Hector had made for her before he left. The warmth in her body making her drowsy, but she didn't dare close her eyes, didn't dare believe tonight was real. "I need a new manager for this diner," Marcus said suddenly, breaking the silence. Mila looked up at him and blinked a few times as if she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "Yes," she said slowly. "I suppose you'll have to find a replacement after Mr. Morrison." She stopped, unsure what to call what had just happened. "After he left?" Marcus nodded. "Right, and I want you for the job." Mila almost spilled her tea. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard, or that he was playing some cruel joke she didn't understand. "Me," she stammered. "You want me to be the manager. That's what I said. But I'm just a server. I don't have a degree. I didn't even finish college. I don't know anything about management, about accounting, about running a restaurant. You can find someone much better than me." Marcus set his coffee down and met her gaze. "I don't need someone with a degree," he said clearly. "I can hire dozens of people with MBAs and 10 years of management experience, but that's not what I need." "Then what do you need?" Mila asked, still doubtful. "I need someone who knows what it's like to be treated badly," Marcus said. "I need someone who'll never let what happened to you happen to anyone else under her authority. I need someone the staff can trust, someone they know will stand up for them if there's a problem. You've worked here long enough to know how everything runs. You've shown you can work hard even in the worst conditions. And most importantly, you've shown you have a spine. You said no to someone with power over you, even knowing it could destroy your life. That's what I need. That's what no one can teach." Mila was silent for a long time, her mind trying to process what she'd just heard. Part of her wanted to believe, wanted to jump for joy, wanted to grab this chance with both hands. But another part, the part that had been hurt too many times, the part that had learned nothing in this world is free, made her stiffen. Her voice cooled as she asked her next question. "What's the condition?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What condition?" "You know what I'm asking," Mila said, her eyes not blinking. "You fired the old manager for what he did to me. You fed me and gave me money, and now you're offering me a promotion. I'm not stupid, Mr. Blackwell. I know nobody gives without taking. So what's the condition? What do you want from me?" She stopped, drew a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly but steady. "Because if you think I'll—" She didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. "Then you've got the wrong person. I'd rather go back to sleeping in my car." The air between them thickened. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and Mila saw something shift in his gray eyes. Not anger, not offense, but something like respect. "You have courage," he said quietly. "I like that. But listen to me carefully, and I'll only say this once. I'm not Derek Morrison. I don't use power to force women, and I certainly don't care who you sleep with or don't sleep with. The only thing I need from you is that you do your job well. You show up on time, you treat the staff fairly, you keep the diner running smoothly, and you report any problems to me. That's all. Nothing else. There'll never be anything else." He paused to let the words sink in. "You work, you're paid fairly, you go home safe. That's the only contract that matters to me. If anyone in my organization, dares to do what Derek Morrison did, I'll deal with them the same way I dealt with him. No exceptions, even if it's me." Mila studied him, searching for a flicker of deceit in those cold gray eyes. But she found none, only a hard, uncompromising honesty. And for the first time in years, Mila felt she could trust a powerful man. "So," Marcus said, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips, "do you accept?" Mila drew a deep breath. "I accept," she said, and her voice didn't tremble anymore. A week passed like a dream. Mila still didn't quite dare believe was real. The morning after that fateful night, she received an official email from the company's Human Resources Department, informing her she'd been appointed interim manager of the 12th branch of the Silver Moon Diner with a salary 3 times higher than what she'd earned as a server. Attached to the email was a lease for a 1-bedroom apartment just 2 blocks from the diner, the rent to be deducted directly from her monthly pay at a rate nearly half the market price. Mila read the email at least 10 times before she dared believe it wasn't a joke. She moved out of her rusty Toyota Corolla on the second day, carrying only a small bag with a few old clothes and her few personal belongings. The apartment wasn't big, just 1 bedroom, a small living room, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, and a bathroom with a hot shower. But to Mila, it was paradise. She stood in the empty room, looking around at the clean white walls, the old wooden floor polished to a shine, and the window overlooking the quiet street below. Then she sat down on the floor and cried from relief, cried from gratitude, cried because for the first time in months she had a home. On the 3rd day, she went to St. Mary's Hospital with a check for $5,000 in her hand. The face of the finance office clerk shifted from cold to astonished when Mila placed the check on the counter and said she wanted to pay part of her mother's hospital bills. They'd been calling her for weeks, demanding payment, their voices growing more threatening each time, and now she could finally answer with action instead of empty promises. After completing the payment, she went up to her mother's room. Margaret Hayes lay in the hospital bed, her skin pale from chemotherapy, most of her hair gone and covered by the floral scarf Mila had bought for her at a thrift shop. But her eyes still lit up when she saw her daughter walk in. "My girl," she said, her voice weak but full of love. "You look different. Is something good happening?" Mila sat beside her mother's bed, took her thin hand, and told her about the new job, the new apartment, everything except the dark details she didn't need to know. Margaret cried, tears rolling down her hollow cheeks, but they were tears of happiness. "I knew you'd be all right," she whispered. "I always knew you were strong." On the 5th day, Mila drove her old car to her friend's house to pick Jenny up. Jenny stood on the sidewalk with a backpack and a large bag holding all her belongings, her wide eyes full of doubt. "You really have an apartment?" Jenny asked for the 3rd time since Mila had called with the news. "You're not joking, are you?" Mila smiled, the first real smile she'd had in months. "Get in, kid. I'll show you." When the apartment door opened, Jenny stood frozen in the doorway for several long seconds. The room didn't have much. Just an old sofa Mila had bought secondhand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a mattress on the bedroom floor because she couldn't afford a bed yet. But it was clean, warm, and most importantly, it was theirs. "This is our home," Jenny whispered, her voice trembling. Mila nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, this is our home. You'll sleep on the sofa for now until I can buy you a bed. I'm sorry it's not very big." Jenny dropped her bag and turned to hug her sister. The 17-year-old was almost as tall as Mila, but thin and fragile, and when she began to cry, her whole body shook like a leaf in the wind. "I missed you," Jenny sobbed. "I worried about you all the time. My friend said I could stay as long as I wanted, but I knew I was a burden. I didn't know where you were or what you were doing, or if you were all right. I was so scared, Mila." Mila held her tightly and felt her own tears fall. "I'm sorry," she whispered into Jenny's hair. "I'm sorry I couldn't take better care of you. But things will be different now, I promise." They stood holding each other in the small room until there were no tears left. Then Jenny pulled back, wiped her eyes on her sleeve, and looked around the apartment again, her eyes still red but already brighter. "You have a kitchen," she said with a little more cheer. "I can cook for you. I learned a few dishes from my friend's mom." Mila smiled, feeling the weight on her shoulders lighten for the first time in months. "Then you'll cook tonight. I'll buy groceries after work." Jenny nodded, her young face glowing with a smile. And in that small room with its old furniture and bare walls, the Hayes sisters finally found what they'd lost for so long. A home, a family, a reason to hope. The 12th branch of the Silver Moon Diner began to change, starting from the smallest things. On her first official day as manager, Mila arrived earlier than everyone else and spent 2 full hours sitting in the office, rewriting the entire payroll procedure on a large whiteboard she'd bought with her own money. She clearly wrote the base wage for each position, how tips were calculated, the fixed payday every Friday, and the hotline number of the Central Human Resources Department so employees could call directly if there were any problems. She hung the board in the staff break room where everyone could see it. No more secrets, no more ambiguity. Everything was as transparent as daylight. In the second week, Mila installed a suggestion box next to the time clock. The box was painted blue, with a small slot on top so people could slip notes inside anonymously. She taped a handwritten sign beside it that said, "If you have a problem but don't feel comfortable speaking directly, write it here. I read it every night, and I'll deal with it. No judgment, no retaliation. I give you my word." At first, the box stayed empty. The staff looked at it with suspicion, too used to promises being just promises and rules existing only on paper. But then one morning, Mila opened the box and found a crumpled note with messy handwriting that said, "Saturday night shifts are short-staffed, and we're working double without extra pay." Mila fixed it within 24 hours, hiring 2 part-time workers for weekends and adjusting overtime pay for those who'd been overworked. She didn't tell anyone about the note, didn't look for the person who wrote it. She just acted. And after that, the box was never empty again. In the 3rd week, Mila contacted a women's shelter on the south side of the city, the one she'd nearly gone to herself in her darkest days. She offered jobs to women who needed work. No experience required, only willingness to learn. The first 2 were Maria, a 32-year-old single mother with eyes always lowered and a faint scar on her arm, and Than, a 20-year-old girl who'd just escaped a violent boyfriend. Mila didn't ask about their pasts. She just taught them how to carry trays, how to take orders, how to smile at customers, and most importantly, she made sure they were paid on time and treated like human beings. The biggest change Mila made was about staff meals. Under Derek, employees were only allowed to eat leftovers after closing, if there were any, and many nights they went home hungry. Mila changed that immediately. She set a new rule that every employee got 1 free meal per shift. Not leftovers, but freshly cooked, hot, and nutritious. She asked Rosa to design a simple but tasty staff menu and counted the cost as an investment, not a loss. And Rosa, who'd endured in silence for years out of fear, began to smile. For the first time in a long while, she cooked with joy instead of dread. She began to sing old songs from home while standing at the stove, her warm voice filling the kitchen like a melody of hope. She talked more, told stories about her homeland, about her daughter Lisa, who'd started therapy, about small dreams she'd once thought were dead. But the most astonishing change was in Sophie, the 29-year-old woman who'd been Derek's victim, who'd submitted to be paid, who'd lost her soul in that dark office. In the first days after Derek disappeared, Sophie still came to work like a walking corpse, eyes down, shoulders hunched, speaking to no one. Mila didn't force her to talk, didn't ask about the past, didn't do anything that might make her feel judged. She only made sure Sophie was treated fairly, paid on time, fed properly, and allowed to rest when needed. And then, one afternoon late in the 3rd week, Sophie lifted her head and met Mila's eyes when Mila asked about the next day's shift. Just for a moment, but it was enough. Sophie was slowly coming back. The light was slowly returning to eyes that had been dead for a very long time. But not everything was easy for Mila. By day, she was a strong and decisive manager, a woman who'd risen from ashes and rebuilt everything from the ground up. But by night, when the apartment sank into darkness and Jenny was asleep on the sofa, the demons returned. Mila woke at 3 a.m. with a scream trapped in her throat, her back soaked with sweat, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. And in her dreams, she was back in that dark storage room, her back against the wall, Derek Morrison moving toward her with that disgusting smile on his face. Her trying to scream but no sound coming out, trying to run but her feet nailed to the floor, until she woke with a jolt, sitting upright and gasping as if she'd just run a marathon. The panic attacks came suddenly and without warning. Once when she was in the diner's storage room checking inventory, and the door closed behind her because of a draft. that soft click of the latch freezing her in place, her heart slamming as if it would explode, her breath short and shallow, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold the pen, and it took her 10 minutes to calm down enough to open the door and step out, and even then she had to lock herself in the bathroom and cry alone for 5 minutes before she could return to work. Mila knew she needed help. She couldn't keep living this way, strong by day and shattered by night, so she went to a support group for survivors of sexual harassment at the community center, 20 minutes walk from her apartment, where at the first meeting she sat in the corner and said nothing, just listened to other women tell their stories. Bosses who harassed them in offices, coworkers who threatened them, customers who groped them and then got them fired when they resisted. Every story different, but the pain the same, the helplessness, the shame, the guilt, as if they'd done something wrong. At the third meeting, Mila finally spoke. She told them about Derek, about the storage room, about 4 weeks without pay, about the nights eating leftovers from the trash. She cried while she told it, and the other women cried with her. No one judged, no one told her what she should have done. They just listened, nodded, and held her hand when she needed it. And for the first time, Mila didn't feel alone. When she got home that night, Jenny was waiting on the sofa with 2 cups of hot tea, the 17-year-old looking at her with eyes older than her years. "Where were you so late?" Jenny asked gently, and Mila sat beside her, took the tea, and decided not to lie anymore. "I went to a support group," she said, "for people who've been harassed, like me." And Jenny was quiet for a long moment, then set the cup down and hugged her. "I guess something had happened," Jenny whispered. "You got so thin these past months. You never told me anything, but I knew. I'm not stupid." And they talked until almost midnight. Mila told her everything about Derek, the car, the hungry nights, Marcus, and the night everything changed. She hid nothing anymore, didn't protect her sister from the truth anymore. And Jenny listened, cried, then squeezed her hand and said she was prouder of her than anyone in the world. That weekend, the doctor from St. Mary's called, and Mila answered with her heart pounding, braced for bad news she'd prepared herself for so long. But the doctor's voice was cheerful. Her mother was responding well to the first round of chemotherapy. The indicators were improving. The tumor was shrinking. The prognosis much better than expected. And Mila hung up and stood motionless in the manager's office for several long minutes, then went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried, not from pain like before, but from relief, from gratitude, because for the first time in a very long time, she dared believe that things might be all right. 2 weeks after that fateful night, Marcus Blackwell pushed open the door of the 12th Silver Moon Diner without warning. The clock read 7 in the evening, peak hour, and the room was crowded with customers. But the first thing Marcus noticed wasn't the number of people. It was the sound, laughter, conversation, the clink of cups and plates, soft music drifting from the old speaker in the corner. An atmosphere completely different from what he remembered. Because before, the diner had always felt heavy and tense, as if everyone were just trying to survive each day, instead of actually living, and now it felt alive and warm, like a home rather than a workplace. Marcus stood at the door for a moment and watched. He saw Rosa laughing with a regular through the kitchen window, her hands moving quickly as she plated food, while her mouth told a story that made the customer laugh. He saw Sophie, once a walking corpse, smiling at a family with children and bending down to speak to a little one in a gentle voice. He saw new faces he didn't recognize, a middle-aged woman with short hair and a shy young girl trying to learn how to smile at customers. And then he saw Mila. She stood behind the bar, checking a receipt with focused attention. So different from the trembling woman eating cold fries in the shadows 2 weeks before. She'd gained some weight. Not much, but enough that her face was no longer hollow, and her cheekbones no longer jutted painfully. Her hair was cut neater and tied back, revealing green eyes that were brighter now, more confident. She stood straight instead of hunched, and when she looked up and saw him, she didn't tremble or lower her gaze. She nodded to him, a small but confident gesture, and signaled him to sit at his usual stool in the corner of the bar. Marcus sat, and Mila brought him a black coffee without sugar, just the way he liked it, without asking. He took the cup, sipped, and waited. Mila stood across from him with both hands on the counter. "Do you want a report, or do you want to look at the numbers yourself?" she asked, her voice steady and professional. "You tell me," Marcus said, a flicker of something like impressed passing through his gray eyes. Mila gave her report with the clarity of someone who'd prepared well. Revenue was up 15% from last month. Food costs were down 8% thanks to Rosa, optimizing the menu and renegotiating with suppliers. No employees had quit since she'd taken over. The suggestion box was getting an average of 5 to 7 notes a week. mostly small issues that were handled immediately. The 2 new hires from the shelter were integrating well and would be formally evaluated after another month. Marcus listened in silence, nodding now and then, and when she finished, he set the cup down and looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. An empty suggestion box doesn't mean there are no problems, he said, not as criticism but as observation. It means problems are being solved before anyone needs to write them down, Mila replied. I learned people won't use the box if they can talk to their manager directly without fear of retaliation. Marcus nodded, and for the first time Mila saw the faintest hint of a smile touch his lips. You've learned quickly. Good. The diner slowly emptied as night grew late. The staff cleaned up and left one by one, saying goodnight to Mila. Rosa was last, pausing at the door to look back at Marcus with a complicated expression, gratitude mixed with lingering fear, then nodding and disappearing into the night. Only Marcus and Mila remained in the quiet diner, like that night 2 weeks before, but everything was different now. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't afraid. She sat on the stool beside him, keeping a respectful distance, and they talked, not about work anymore, but about other things. Mila told him about Jenny studying for finals and dreaming of college, about her mother recovering better than expected, about the support group she went to each week. She didn't describe the nightmares or panic attacks in detail, but she mentioned she was learning how to heal. Marcus listened more than he spoke, sometimes nodding or asking a short question that showed he was truly paying attention. He didn't comfort her with empty words, didn't say everything would be fine or that she was strong. He just listened, and somehow that quiet listening was worth more than 1,000 words. The clock was nearly midnight when Marcus finally stood to leave. He left a $100 bill under the coffee cup as always, a habit Mila had learned not to argue with, knowing he wouldn't listen if she said it was too much for a coffee, and knowing exactly what she'd do with it. Put it into the emergency fund she'd started for staff who needed sudden help with medical bills or car repairs. Will you come back? Mila asked as Marcus reached the door. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes deep in the dim light. When you need me, he said. And then he stepped out into the night and was gone, leaving Mila alone with a small smile and the strange feeling that someone was watching over her from a distance, not to control her, but to protect her. A week after that meeting, Marcus returned to the diner late one evening when most of the customers had already left. He sat in his usual place at the corner of the bar with a cup of black coffee in his hand, his gray eyes looking out through the window where the streetlights flickered in the dark. Mila was finishing the end-of-day work, checking the books and making sure everything had been cleaned, sending the staff home first and staying behind herself to lock up, a habit she'd formed since becoming manager. When only the 2 of them were left in the quiet diner, Mila poured herself a cup of tea and sat on the stool across from Marcus. She'd been thinking about this question for days now, since the night he saved her from Derek, since the times he'd come by and listened without asking for anything. She couldn't understand it. Why? She asked, her voice gentle but determined. Why did you really help me that night? And please don't say because it's your diner or because you don't tolerate employees being treated badly. I've heard that answer already. I want the real reason. Marcus didn't answer at once. He looked into the now cold coffee in his hand, his gray eyes distant as if he were looking at something far away. A memory, a pain, a scar that had never healed. The silence stretched so long Mila thought he wouldn't answer, and she was ready to retreat and apologize for asking too much when Marcus finally spoke. My mother, he said, his voice low and rough as if the words were hard to release. She worked in a place like this. Mila stayed silent, barely daring to breathe, afraid any sound might make him stop. Marcus went on, his eyes still fixed on the distance. She was a waitress in a small diner on the south side of the city. She worked 6 days a week, sometimes 7, to raise me. My father left when I was too young to remember his face. It was just the 2 of us, and she did everything so I could go to school, have clothes to wear, have food to eat. He paused, his jaw tightening. The owner of that diner was a man like Derek. He liked young, pretty female employees. He withheld their pay, threatened them, coerced them. My mother wasn't young or beautiful anymore after years of hard work, but he still didn't leave her alone. He told her she could keep her job if she pleased him. Marcus's voice grew colder, a cold different from his usual control, the cold of an anger that had cooled over time but never gone out. My mother refused. She was a woman with dignity. She'd rather starve than submit. And he fired her. Not just fired her. He destroyed her reputation, told people she stole money, that she was a bad employee, that no one should hire her. He closed his eyes for a second. My mother looked for work for months, but no one took her. She began washing clothes, cleaning houses, doing whatever she could to earn money. She worked from early morning until late at night, without rest, without proper food. She gave everything to me and kept nothing for herself. And then she got sick. Marcus opened his eyes, but they weren't looking at Mila. They were looking at something farther away. A hospital room, a thin hand holding his, a last breath. She died when I was 14, he said, his voice barely a whisper, in a cold hospital room. She died of exhaustion, of malnutrition, of not having money for treatment, of a whole system that turned its back on her. And I stood there at 14, holding her hand, and swore I'd never let that happen to anyone again, if I ever had the power to stop it. Silence filled the diner. Mila felt tears running down her cheeks before she realized it. She looked at the man sitting across from her, the ruthless crime lord the whole city feared, and for the first time she saw the orphaned 14-year-old still living inside him, the boy who'd lost his mother and carried that pain for 22 years. So when I saw you that night, Marcus said, his voice returning to its usual calm and control, trembling in the dark, eating leftovers from the trash because some bastard decided your body was the price for your wages. He paused and took a deep breath. I saw my mother. I saw what she'd endured, and I couldn't let it continue. Not under my roof. Not when I had the power to change it. Mila didn't speak for a long time. She just sat there, tears still falling, looking at the man who'd saved her with new understanding. Then she reached out and lightly touched the back of his hand on the counter, a small but meaningful gesture. Your mother would be proud of you, she said, her voice trembling but sure. She'd be proud you didn't let that happen to me, to Sophie, to Rosa and her daughter, to all the people you protected. She'd be proud her son grew up to stand on the side of those who have no one to stand for them. Marcus looked down at her small hand on his, then up at Mila, and in his cold gray eyes she saw something she'd never seen there before. Not cruelty, not control, but gratitude, and maybe, just maybe, a little peace. 1 year later, the 12th branch of the Silver Moon Diner had become the brightest spot in the entire chain. Revenue was up nearly 40% from the year before. Not a single employee had quit. The suggestion box was almost always empty because problems were solved as soon as they appeared. Mila had hired 8 more employees, most of them women from the shelter or people with difficult pasts who needed a second chance. The diner became a place that didn't just serve food but served hope. Margaret Hayes, Mila's mother, completed her final round of treatment, and the doctors declared her cancer in remission. She moved into a 2-bedroom apartment Mila rented near the diner, large enough for the 3 of them to have their own space, but close enough that they could eat dinner together every day. Jenny was accepted into college with a full scholarship in social work, saying she wanted to help women like her sister. Women pushed into corners who still found a way to stand up. On a stormy late autumn night, Marcus Blackwell pushed open the diner door, looking different than Mila had ever seen him. His clothes were soaked, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and his usually cold gray eyes held a deep exhaustion. He sat in his usual place at the corner of the bar without a word. Mila brought him a hot coffee and a clean towel. She didn't ask what had happened. She just sat beside him and waited. After a long while, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse. I lost Victor, he said. Last night, in a hit that shouldn't have happened. He was the only person I fully trusted for 12 years, and now he's gone. Mila didn't offer empty comfort. She knew it meant nothing to someone like Marcus. She just stayed there beside him in silence, because sometimes presence is worth more than words. I'm tired, Marcus whispered, so quietly Mila had to lean closer to hear. This empire, the blood and violence, the deaths and betrayals, sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. You can't save everyone, Mila said gently, but you saved me, and that matters. To me, to my mother, to my sister, to Rosa, to Sophie, to Maria, to Than, to everyone who works here. You're not a good man by the world's definition, but you've done good, and sometimes that's enough. Marcus looked at her, and in those tired gray eyes Mila saw a small spark of light. You're a reminder, he said. A reminder of why I started all of this. Don't ever let anyone make you invisible again. Never, Mila replied, her voice steady as steel. Marcus stood when the rain began to fade. He left a $100 bill under the coffee cup, as always, and Mila knew she'd put it into the staff emergency fund as always. He paused at the door and looked back at the diner one last time. The warm yellow light, the neatly stacked chairs, the clean, quiet kitchen, and Mila standing in the space she'd transformed from a place of fear into a place of hope. He nodded to her, a wordless goodbye, an acknowledgement, a promise he'd keep watching from a distance. Then he stepped outside and disappeared into the damp night. Mila watched until he was gone, then turned back, switched off the diner lights, locked the door, and walked home a few blocks to the apartment where her mother and sister were waiting. She was no longer the trembling girl eating cold fries from the trash in the dark. She was a woman standing in the light, paid fairly, respected, and never invisible again. And the most frightening man in the city, the man who saw her when no one else bothered to look, had changed everything. This story teaches us that sometimes angels don't come from heaven but from the darkest places, that kindness can live in hearts that seem turned to stone, that no one deserves to be treated as if they don't exist, and that one person willing to stand up, to see, to act, can completely change another person's life. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our daily videos. Please like and share this video with the people you love so we can spread these good values farther. I'd love to know how you felt about this story. Have you ever witnessed or experienced moments like this in your own life? Do you believe kindness still exists in this world? Please share your feelings from your heart in the comments below. I read every comment and deeply appreciate each one. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. I wish all of you watching this good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Always remember that you deserve to be seen, to be heard, and to be treated with respect. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.